Welcome. I'm calling this budget hearing to order. If you're able to stand, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome. For the budget meeting, we will be doing introductions. My name is Brian Medved. I am the board president, and I will go down the board and have them introduce themselves as well.
Amanda Reineman, Vice President.
Tom Barney, Board Clerk.
Russ Hayward, Director.
Tracy Pollack, Director.
Bob Soderberg, Director.
Michael Loth, Treasurer.
Thank you. And I will turn it over to Dr. Chris Ryder to introduce his staff.
This evening, we have Brittany Altendorf, our Director of Business Services, Jake Miziak, our Director of Teaching and Learning, Jess Guerin, KMS Middle School Principal, Katie Cole, Principal of Amy Bell, Andy Eisenbach, Principal of County Line, Joel Farron, Principal of Germantown High School, Dave Smith, Associate Principal, Germantown High School, Andy Rooney, Dean of Students in Academic and Career Planning, Germantown High School, Mike Nowak, Director of Human Resources, Dr. Dana Croat, our Principal at Rockfield, Mr. Todd Lamb, Director of Student Services. I think I got everyone. And, oh, yes, way in the back are Mr. Gonzalez, Principal of MacArthur, and Brandon Cole, Associate Principal at Kennedy Middle School.
Okay, one other thing, just for housekeeping, we have some late arrivals coming. If you're a voting member in the district, please sit in the middle section so that we can tally votes a little easier. And if you're not in the district and you're here just for other reasons, please sit on the outside. Thank you. Official meeting notification, Dr. Reuter.
Yes, according to state statute, the budgetary hearing is properly posted and notifications are present.
Thank you. Item C, energy exemption and debt notification. Ms. Altenburg.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, sorry. Starting in 2009 and ending in 2017, districts were allowed to levy additional funds, and then they were use those funds to invest in equipment to reduce energy costs. This is outside the revenue limit, and the districts that took advantage of this were allowed to levy above and beyond their revenue limit. Per state statute 121.91, districts like ours that took advantage of this have to report out the expenses and the potential cost savings annually at the annual meeting until the debt is paid off. So in 2015, our school district invested $7 million into our buildings to reduce future energy or utility costs. The total expenses incurred with interest on that borrow is $8.3 million. As of today, the 7th year of the borrow, the total cost avoidance or reduction projected is $3.7 million. The debt will be paid off in 2025 or earlier, and when that is done, the report out at the annual meeting will not have to be had anymore.
Thank you. Item D, presentation of the budget. Dr. Reuter.
Thank you. I'll turn this over to Ms. Altendorf to present our 2022-2023 budget.
Before I start getting in depth into the budget, I wanted to give a brief overview of the purpose of tonight's budget hearing and then the annual meeting, which we will have later this evening at 7:30. The purpose of the budget hearing is to do a high-level overview of the current year, the 22-23 budget. And during the presentation, I will be referencing our funds or our fund descriptions. These are set by the state. The Department of Public Instruction sets these, and all districts have to use these funds. So I just wanted to give you an overview of them before I get into depth and start talking about our different funds. The general fund, or Fund 10, and the special education fund, Fund 27, are our two funds that we use the most. So the most revenue comes in and the most expenditures go out of those two funds. The gifts or donations fund are any funds that have been donated or gifted to our district. Depending on the donor's description of the donation, we have to use those dollars for specific purposes. If there is no description on the donation, we can use those funds for any purposes that we see fit, and those funds do roll over year. The non-referendum and referendum fund, I'll get into a little more detail, but one of them, you do not have to go out to the taxing polls or the voting polls and get a vote on them. In referendum, you actually do have to go ask the community for approval, which will then increase their property taxes above our revenue limit. Capital projects funds, those are funds set aside to continue to maintain our facilities. They have to be approved by the board annually. Food service fund is what it is. It's the food service or our food and nutrition program. And then the community service fund, which funds our use of the community using our facilities. At the annual meeting later on tonight, we are going to ask for approval of 5 resolutions. The first one, again, is the community service tax. So that is asking for property taxes to support the expenses so the community can use our facilities. Our property tax levy, so the amount that we are asking the property taxpayers of the school district to pay. Real estate resolution, that is in regards to, because the school district property is paid for by the taxpayers and the state aid, we have to annually give the board approval to make decisions throughout the year if they need to buy or sell property. It will still come to the board, it will still have to be approved, and a motion will have to be placed, but it is giving them the authority this year to bring those and make those decisions. The board salaries is one of the resolutions, and then the final resolution is allowing the district within state statute to set our annual meeting within the state statute guidelines for the 23-24 school year. The general fund, or Fund 10, again, is our largest fund, so the most revenues and expenditures come in and out of this fund. You can see on this slide that over the years, the revenues have decreased slightly each year. Just so you're aware, the first column is the actuals of 2021. The middle column is the actual spent or received in 21-22, and then the final column is the projected budget. So the revenues have a slight decrease over the years. Most years, the expenditures have the slight decrease as well, but because we've received additional state aid and ESSER dollars in the past 2 years, some of the expenditures and the revenues are not following within the same year. So we might expend money, and then due to when the state sends out their payments, we might spend money in 1 year and we might receive the money the following year. This year, we are bringing a balanced budget to the community. It is approximately $46 million, as you can see on the far right, for the revenues and the expenditures. This is just another way of looking at the general fund expense and revenue breakdown. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the 2 sources of revenue that are the largest for the school district in any school district is the property taxes and the state aid. We do have what is called a revenue limit. We are only allowed to bring in so much revenue from those 2 pieces each year. So if state aid would increase, property taxes would decrease, and vice versa, because the pie, no matter what, has to stay the same size. Other areas that we receive funding would be student fees or fines. Inter-district sources is if we have open enrollment students that come into our district. So if we have students that don't reside within our school boundaries but choose to come here, we then get funded from those school districts into our state aid. That's a reconciliation that is done in August of the prior year, which we have to account for in the current year. And then federal sources, our any federal grants that we receive or ESSER dollars that we are projected to receive this year. And then other sources, are basically our capital leases, and that basically says that we are going out to borrow money for our capital leases, and then we use those dollars to then pay for the leases, so it's a pass-through. So you'll see the same side on the revenue and then a similar expense on the other side. On the right-hand side of the screen is our expenses. It's broken down per DPI, or the Department of Public Instruction, into 3 categories. Instructional services is 47% of our budget. Support services is examples of the support staff, our insurance, transportation for the students, and then non-program transactions are the transfer to the special ed fund. So if the special ed fund, federal and state grants do not cover our expenditures, we have to transfer funds from the general fund to cover the special ed expenses. And then also in there, in the non-program transactions, are open enrollment out, if someone chooses that lives here to open enroll out to another school district, or tuition if we have to pay tuition to another educational system. Some of the takeaways or items that affected the general fund budget are listed on this slide. So our revenue is based on the number of students that we have in our building on a certain date every year. So our revenue limit is based on a count that we have on the 3rd Friday of September. Every school district across the state of Wisconsin does the count on the same Friday of September. And during that count this year, we saw an increase in, we call them head count or belly buttons, because 4K student is a whole body, but when it comes to funding, they are only worth 60% of funding than a regular full-time student. So based on the count, we call them belly buttons or head counts. With that, we did start our 4K program this year, which brought in 169 students. During our head count this year, we did see a decrease in kindergartners of 78 students, and there was a removal on our revenue limit of the declining enrollment exemption. Because school districts start their year on July 1 and we don't do the count until September, DPI has allowed some school districts that have a declining enrollment a 1-year exemption. It's kind of like a gap that it's a stopgap, which allows them to continue with that same revenue for that year so they can plan for the declining of enrollment the next year. So we did not receive that this year. We have in past years. The private school voucher program, it did increase by 30 students from the previous year. The voucher program is a tax that we get to put on our revenue limit, increases our taxes, which then the money goes to the private schools for students that attend the private schools. So again, we're a pass-through. We receive the money on the taxes, and then we pay it out to the private school districts. Based on board approval, there is a 3% wage adjustment built into this school year's budget. State aid increased by 4.5%. That is about $550,000. Just to get a reference, last year it increased by 32%, and the previous year it increased by 12%. Final property values, we saw an increase of 12.2% on average on all our 7 municipalities, so some increased less and some increased more, but the average was 12.2%. They did see an increase in property values across. It's not just the Germantown School District. The property tax levy, so we are asking the taxpayers to pay 2.19% more than we did the previous year. That is due to the property values increasing. The mill rate is a decrease of 9.08%. That means that per $1,000 value of your house, you will be paying 83 cents less. Now, if your property value or the amount of your house is increased, that would be larger. But if your property value stayed the same from last year to this year, you should see a decrease in your property taxes. The next chart goes over our district's fund balance over the last 10 years. Previous years, you can see we held a fund balance about 25%. In 2018, 19, and 1920, the board did make a decision to reduce the fund balance and put money into our facilities. We have had a conscious effort over the last 3 years to increase our fund balance back to the appropriate level. By having a decreased fund balance, it does affect our borrowing rate. Banks or investors look at how much money you have to say what rate they're going to give you on an interest rate if you do need to go out to borrow. We also have 2 times a year in which we have to go out for a short-term borrow because we don't have enough money to fund the expenses that we have throughout the year. So increasing the fund balance would decrease the amount of short-term borrow or eliminate that if we get to the appropriate fund balance percentage. The next slide goes over 4 more of our district funds. The first one is the donations or the special education fund. Again, donations are anything that has been donated to our district. It can roll over year. So if somebody or a corporation donated $50,000, that does not mean it has to be spent in that current year. The special education fund, again, has to have a 0 balance, so you cannot bring in more revenue or expense more. It has to be a 0 balance. That's why we do a transfer from the general fund every year. The debt service fund, I briefly went into this previously. There are 2 types of debt service funds. One is the non-referendum, that's Fund 38, and the other one is referendum approved, so we have to go out to the taxpayers and get a vote on it, is Fund 39, and the only item in Fund 39 is the referendum for construction. The district is trying to pay off debt sooner. We have refinanced multiple of our debt to pay off our debt earlier, in which then our interest rates are reduced. The next slide shows our capital projects funds. Under our capital projects funds, we have 2 funds. We have Fund 41, which is capital projects, and Fund 46, which is capital improvements. Both of them have to have plans that are approved by the board. The capital projects funds in previous years was about $400,000. We've increased it to $450,000 with a goal to increase it to $600,000 with a $50,000 increase each year if it is feasible. And then our capital improvement funds, which is Fund 46, is a plan in which school districts can fund, and it affects our shared costs. So basically, if you fund this, it doesn't affect your shared cost that year. It affects the shared cost in the year that you spend it. So it allows school districts to save money for larger facility projects without affecting the property taxes and state aid. The food service fund, self-explanatory. It is our food and nutrition program. That is not funded by the school district at all. It's a self-serving operation. It gets federal aid because we are part of the federal food and nutrition program, and then it also receives a revenue from school lunch fees. And then finally, the Community Service Fund is Fund 80. That is our expenditures and our revenues that we get to obtain to allow, or to have, our community use our facilities. So we get to ask for taxes on that to support that, and then we also collect revenue if outside users rent our facilities, and then we expense in that same area. Per state statute, annually, if you do levy into Fund 80 or the community service levy, you have to tell the community what you are using those funds for. So for specifics, we do get to put a portion of our utility bills into Fund 80 because the lights need to be on when the community uses our facilities, and the heat and air conditioning need to be on. So we get to do a calculation that we have to show the state to be able to allow to put some of our expenditures for our utilities in this fund. Again, custodial wages or the PAC coordinator wages, a portion of that can go into Fund 80 because they do support the community use. A portion of our playground maintenance can go into Fund 80 because our playgrounds are open to the community if they would like to use them at any time. And then also allocation of our site maintenance costs. So if we have site maintenance, like for example, our pool or our fitness center or our field house, we can do a portion of, if there needed to be a basketball hoop that was replaced, a portion of that could go into Fund 80 because the community uses it. The last slide I believe I have is going over our student enrollment. Again, we are funded based on the number of students that are enrolled in our school district. In previous years, we had around 3,900 students on average. We did see a decline in 2020-21, and we are working on getting that to increase. As you can see, there was an increase over the 3 years. So our count is 3,814 this year, with an average over the 10 years of 3,864.
Thank you. I will open it up for any questions, comments. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to public comment. If there are any residents that would like to ask questions or make comments on the budget-related items that were presented just now, feel free to come on down. We don't have a sign-up tonight, but if you have a comment or a question, please move forward.
I'm not good at that. Do I have to say my address or anything?
Just your name and
Scott Heffley. I've come before this board many times, mostly, a couple of years ago, and I just wanted to thank everybody up there and everybody behind the scenes that put this budget together. I was here a couple of years ago, wanting fiscal responsibility being reinforced, and I realize it comes at a cost, and the cost is you have to cut and balance. A lot of work behind the scenes, but I'm happy that we have balanced budgets. I was the guy yelling about that. I don't know if that's the right word, discussing it, but my background is finance, so I want to give a shout out like I told you I do. If you do something that I appreciate, I come forward and say that. So I appreciate the work that's done. I realize sacrifices had to be made to make this happen, and that's not going to make everybody happy. But I think, this is the toughest year maybe with the inflation going on, the things going on, recession, costs, and all that. The fact you were able to produce a balanced budget, I appreciate. So thank you.
thank you, Mr. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Beeman. I'm a taxpayer in the community. My kids go to County Line. I'm also here representing the GEA this evening, and I just wanted to share a statement on behalf of the GEA. I'm proud to represent the dedicated teachers and staff at County Line School and also across the district. The board has stated on numerous occasions that their goal is to attract and retain the best staff for our students. However, recent decisions suggest otherwise. We would like to express our disappointment in the district's decision to impose a 3% salary adjustment. When negotiations began, CPI was at 4.7%, and the cost of living has gone up substantially since then. Despite this, the district has chosen not to give a cost of living adjustment. The negotiations team presented an abundance of comprehensive data showing that Germantown teachers have the lowest benefits and are tied for the lowest pay compared to 15 area school districts. With this information, the board still chose to only give a 3% increase. All of this took place while the district had a surplus of $958,749.76. Even more concerning is that the 2022-23 budget proposal again includes only 3% increase for salary. It is likely the cost of living increase will be quite higher than 3%, since the current CPI for contracts that start in April of 2023 is 7.92%. And if the board continues in the direction of low pay and benefits, it will become increasingly difficult to retain and attract qualified educators, which will ultimately affect the students of the Germantown School District. Thank you.
Thank you. I have some comments related to the budget that I will be giving some explanation as to what we did and why we did what we did. That'll be in the next meeting, under the annual meeting, under the State of the District address that I'll be giving. So, thank you. Anyone else? Whoop. We'll wait for you.
Hello, my name is Dave Montgomery. I am a former parent in the district and now a resident and taxpayer. First off, I just want to thank you because I know that putting together a budget and making those decisions are so difficult, and I know you had to do some difficult things, and I think everyone believes teachers, we can never really compensate teachers the way we want to be able to compensate them. So it's a tough place, and inflation has really been difficult. So I want to tip my hat first to all of you because I know you've put in the hard work, and I appreciate, Brittany, the presentation you put in was excellent. It was clear. I do have one question. It has to do with K4. So K4 was an expansion, and it's an expansion of revenue. My question is it balanced? Is K4 actually costing us more money than it's bringing in? Because that's what seems unclear.
Go ahead, Brittany.
The answer is yes. Normally in their first 2 years, starting a 4K program will cost more just because we only receive a third of the revenue. So by the third year, we'll receive the full revenue for a 0.6 FTE because they're not here all day, so we can't get a full FTE on them. But the first year, we're getting a third of a 0.6 of what we'd get for a fifth grader, let's just say. So by the third year, the answer is yes, but not the first 2 years. We do receive a 4K startup grant, but can only be used on non-reoccurring expenses. So to furnish classrooms, to buy curriculum, those type of things, but we can't use it on staff or transportation. So those costs we had to incur this year that we're not receiving revenue for.
Okay, so it's fair to say that the first couple of years, there's a certain sacrifice because in the long run, it's going to be more financially feasible, and not to mention the benefit to the community of having K4. Okay, thank you. Great answer.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Tori Lauer, and I am representing GEA. I'm also a teacher here at the high school. And I'd like to reiterate what Ms. Beeman had earlier said, that the lack of funding for salary increases hurts the ability for the district to hire and retain competent, hardworking, dedicated teachers in the district. Contrary to what the board has been told, we know as teachers that staff have left for higher wages, and that is their sole decision to leave to get those higher wages in other communities around Germantown. A 3% increase sets teachers back with inflation, with the cost of living, and there is the surplus of $958,749. $958,749.76. There was money to fully fund the requested increase for teachers. With the cost of inflation, with the cost of property taxes, with everything that goes into working and giving our time, because our time is not 7 to 2:45. Everyone knows we put in extra time in order to do our jobs properly, in order to give really well-designed and implemented lesson plans to make them engaging for our students. And as a district resident, that is exciting to see that happening. And I do that with my lessons every single day to inspire, to help grow our students so that they can be the leaders of the future. And a 3% does not tell us that we're valued. Next year, we're projected to see a 7.92% increase in cost of living and CPI. What will you do next year? Will you also tell us there isn't the money when there's almost a $1 million surplus? Will you tell us with words that you value us and then turn around and see our salaries actually decrease? Because by the time we get these increases, by the time we pay for our insurance, which is terrible, by the way, we lose money year after year. Teachers want to stay here in Germantown. We love our students. We love doing the work for our students in this district. But we need to see the respect from you and from the community for the hard work that we do. So I would like you guys to consider that in the future on what we bring and how you will show your value and your support for us and what we do for the children that are in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? If anyone else would like to speak, if you want to just queue up so we know there's people still wanting to speak, that'd be great.
Good evening, Kelly Betcher. It's been a minute. Good to see you guys again. Thank you for balancing the budget. I thoroughly appreciate that. As I'm sitting back there and I'm listening to the concerns about what the teachers are receiving for their raises and the cost of living raise, I can't help but think about what I've dealt with as a registered nurse and through COVID, and I didn't get a 3% raise even through COVID. So these cost of living raises, nobody gets them anymore. I appreciate what you guys have done. I understand that it's a struggle. I understand that we want to keep valuable teachers. I appreciate them hugely because I don't want to do what they do. I'll wipe a butt all day long before I'll deal with what teachers deal with. But nobody gets cost of living raises anymore. And I think that that needs to be realized. We appreciate teachers and we value teachers. But if they're looking at taking more for their raise, well then how does that affect my budget with my family? Because if they're taking more out of my pocket because my tax dollars are going to pay them, then what does that do for my family? I don't get that cost of living raise, so it has to come from somewhere. It's not free. Nothing is free. Everybody has to work for something. So I just hope they realize that with, I get their struggle. I really do. Everything costs more for everybody nowadays, but cost of living raises are kind of a thing of the past.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Heather Zvitkovitz. I am both a resident of Germantown and I'm an English teacher at the high school as well. I just wanted to bring up something that a couple of my colleagues in the math department have dealt with simply because of no coverage. So one of our math teachers is on maternity leave, and I know that our district tried really, really hard to get a maternity sub, but nobody would be had because of money. We don't pay as much as the neighboring districts. So there's no maternity sub for the teacher that is on maternity leave. So 4 of the other math teachers have voluntarily taken overloads to help cover those classes. And one in particular had, one teacher had to go out on medical leave who was covering part of this overload. So now there's one math teacher who is covering 49 freshmen in one classroom in the lecture hall down the hall from us. And she has partnered with another friend who has given up her only prep to cover all 49 of those students at once. So that's one math teacher with an overload and an additional teacher helping to cover with no preps. She teaches all 7 periods throughout the day, simply because we don't have any subs to come because we aren't paying as much as other neighboring districts. I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that situation, that it's a huge classroom of students, almost 50 freshmen, trying to teach them math in the 7th period of the day. And the 2 women who do it are phenomenal. They're very energetic and they are very engaging, and it's a difficult thing to do. I've subbed in the room with them before, but that's the spot that we are in simply because the district will not pay teachers as much as neighboring districts do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I don't see anyone moving, so I'll entertain another motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. We are adjourned at 7:37. We'll take a short 3-minute recess, and then we'll begin the annual meeting.